It's Red Eye Radio. Gary McNamara and Eric Harley talk about everything from politics to social issues and news of the day. Whether you're up late or you're just starting your day, welcome to the show. From the Uniden America Studios, this is Red Eye Radio.
All across America, we are Red Eye Radio. He is Eric Harley, and I'm Gary McNamara. Eric has the morning off. I don't. Well, he has the morning off because he's sick. And hopefully he gets better very soon. Oh, no. Oh, wait a minute. Maybe. Oh, yeah. Look at this. I just saw this polling here. This was done University of Houston, Texas Southern University polling. And this was done in October. All right. This was done. The writing is so small. And this is the Democratic primary polling for Texas U.S. Senate seat. All right. This would be for the primary polling. Who do you think leads in Texas for the Democrat primary? For the U.S. Senate seat of Cornyn. Yes, you got it. Jasmine Crockett, my congresswoman, leads with 31% of those Democrats polled saying they would want Jasmine Crockett. James Tallarico, number 2 at 25%. Beto still has 25%. The eternal losing candidate. And Colin Allred, 13%. There you go. Democrats have put Jasmine Crockett in the lead early for the U.S. Senate seat. Like we said, they haven't learned anything. All right, this is really an interesting article. It was written by Christopher Rufo, who, along with Ryan Thorpe, broke that story about the widespread fraud in the welfare programs in Minnesota. And as he wrote over the weekend, it's not racist to notice Somali fraud. Remember, he was one of those people that early on was really attacking critical race theory early on. Because if you remember his name from that. The recent scandal reveals an uncomfortable truth. Different cultures lead to different outcomes. Last week, my colleague and I broke the story about the widespread fraud committed by Somalis in Minnesota. Members of the state's Somali community allegedly participated in complex schemes related to autism services, food programs, and housing, which prosecutors estimate have stolen billions in taxpayer money. Even worse, some of the cash has ended up in the hands of Al-Shabaab, a terrorist organization in Somalia. The story quickly reached the White House. Within days, President Trump announced that he was revoking the temporary protected status for all Somali migrants living in Minnesota. Progressive has suggested that our reporting and the subsequent policy change were racist. While many of those indicted in these schemes are Somali, these critics argue the federal government should not hold Minnesota's Somali community corporately responsible for the actions of individuals. This criticism is superficially appealing, but it isn't persuasive on closer inspection. First, description of the facts should not be measured as racist or not racist, but rather true or not true. And in this case, the truth is that numerous members of a relatively small community participated in a scheme that stole billions of funds. This is a legitimate consideration for American immigration policy, which is organized around nation of origin and for more than 30 years has favorably treated Somalis relative to other groups. It is more than fair to ask whether the policy has served the national interest. The fraud story suggests that the answer is no. What they're saying is, in the United States, we have treated Somalis more favorably than other countries and other groups. And as he writes, it's more than fair to ask whether that policy has served the national interest. The fraud story suggests that the answer is no. Second, the fact that Somalis are black is incidental. If Norwegian immigrants were perpetrating fraud at the same alleged scale and had the same employment and income statistics as Somalis, it would be perfectly reasonable to make the same criticism and enact the same policy response. It would not be racist against Norwegians to do so. Further, Somalis have enormously high unemployment rates, and federal law enforcement have long considered Minneapolis's Little Mogadishu's neighborhood a hotspot for terrorism recruitment. We should condemn that behavior without regard to skin color. The underlying question, which until now Americans have been loath to address directly, is that of different behaviors and outcomes between different groups. Americans tend to avoid this question, rely on euphemisms, and let the distinction remain implied rather than spoken aloud. Yet it seems increasingly untenable to maintain this Anglo-American courtesy when the left has spent decades insisting that we conceptualize our national life in terms of group identity. I mean, when you look at it, critical race theory is saying that there is a culture of whiteness, and the culture of whiteness is the culture of racism, and that we are so culturally racist as whites that society must be set up that all whites are racist and society must be set up that way. Well, if you're saying that, if you're the ones, you're the Democrats, and you are the ones that have created culture, by the way, where culture doesn't even exist. I don't know of a white culture. I'm sure the Democrats will have the definition for me. I'm awaiting the definition so we can cross-examine that definition. But it said the reality is that different groups have different cultural characteristics. The national culture of Somalia is different from the national culture of Norway. Somalis and Norwegians, therefore, tend to think differently, behave differently, and organize themselves differently, which leads to different group outcomes. Norwegians in Minnesota behave similarly to Norwegians in Norway. Somalis in Minnesota behave similarly to Somalis in Somalia. Many cultural patterns of Somalia, particularly close networks, informal economies, and distrust of state institutions, travel with them and have shown up in Minnesota as well. In the absence of strong assimilation pressures, the fraud networks aren't so surprising. They reflect the extension of Somali institutional norms into a new environment with weak enforcement and poorly designed incentives. The beauty of America is that we had a system that thoughtfully balanced individual and group considerations. We recognized that all men, whether their background, have a natural right to life, liberty, property, and equal treatment under the law. We also recognize that group averages can be a basis for judgment, especially in immigration, where they help determine which potential immigration groups are more suitable and advantageous for America. These principles are in tension, but are not a contradiction. As a sociological matter, a policy of equal rights to all individuals will result in unequal outcomes among groups. This is not a sign of injustice per se. It is an inevitability. No two groups are the same, and therefore, no two groups will have the same outcomes in a system of individual liberty and equality. The firestorm around the Somali fraud story was so intense precisely because it forced this question into the spotlight. For decades, America has given Somali immigrants special privileges through TPS. We have expected Somalis to play by the rules, contribute to the country, and assimilate into the culture. Some individuals have certainly done so, but as this fraud story suggests, many others have not. A rational government would amend its policies accordingly. We can see the same process playing out in other parts of the world. In the United Kingdom, mass immigration from incompatible cultures is creating a civilization crisis. Rather than replicate the policies of our sister country, we should accept reality and adopt a more thoughtful policy which recognizes cultural norms as a reasonable measure of capacity to assimilate and to contribute. You know, it was a few years ago. I remember Canada took the poll, and the vast majority, I mean, it was landslide numbers, said anybody who immigrates to Canada should have the values of Canadians, of the Canadian culture. And of course they should. And said it before, all cultures are not equal. There are cultures that are more moral than cultures that are not. We know this. We know this through the way women are treated around the world in different cultures. We know that for a fact. You look at how cultures slowly change. We talked about it earlier. What is acceptable in Great Britain, in that particular culture of that people now, of the lack of free speech and putting people in jail, is not compatible with our culture. And we're talking Great Britain. Because it's what the thought process is. The culture that you grow up in, the environment that you grow up in, can influence, how you become an adult. Now, we know why the Democrats scream racism is because they can't defend it. Good God. Part of the hysteria, I believe, of the media wanting to know whether Trump was healthy or not, with no indication that he is not, was because of Tim Walz trying to deflect to that over the weekend when it came to the fraud in Minnesota and how culpable the politicians of Minnesota might be and how culpable he might be in this particular situation. We are Red Eye Radio.
Brought to you by FPPF, Fuel Power Max.
Smart owner-operators make every single week as profitable as possible. One trip is not enough time to be considered profitable or unprofitable, and an entire month may be too much time to manage. 1 week is the right amount of time to deal with efficiently. To do so, look at the advantages and disadvantages of every day of the week. Match trip length to the optimum day of the week. Plan to deliver on the day you have the best opportunity of getting a load. Your personal weekly plan will vary depending on the weekly delivery flow cycle of your region, typical length of haul, personal requirements, and other factors. What's important is to have a specific weekly plan that helps you be successful. Owner-Operator Business 101 is provided by Overdrive's Partners in Business program. Go to overdriveonline.com to the Partners in Business section of the website for more details on this and many other topics. Brought to you by Shell Rotella, with advanced synthetic technology is designed to help keep your rig running with more mileage and less maintenance.
Lines open for your calls. 866-90-RED-EYE on Red Eye Radio.
We're Red Eye Radio. He's Eric Harley, and I'm Gary McNamara. Eric has the morning off because he's under the weather, but I'm here. Hopefully he's back tomorrow. From what I got in a quick message from him yesterday, he wasn't much better than the day before. So he's been sick since last Friday, and I guess he said it's painful to speak. And that's tough when you do this job. So hopefully he recovers and gets back here ASAP. Speaking of the last article that we just read to you from the reporters who broke that story on the Somali fraud in Minnesota, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent announced that the Treasury Department was investigating reports that Minnesota taxpayer funds may have been diverted to the terrorist organization Al-Shabaab. In a post on X, Bessent said the agency was investigating allegations that under the feckless management of former President Joe Biden's administration and Governor Tim Walz, taxpayer money in the state was ending up in the hands of terrorists. Bessent also praised President Trump for his leadership and said the agency is acting fast to ensure that American citizens' taxes were not going to fund acts of global terror. At my direction, the U.S. Treasury is investigating allegations, all these allegations that the money did go to a terrorist organization. So this thing here, wow, I mean, it's just, when you look at this, when you look at the murder of the one National Guardswoman and the wounding of another, who, by the way, I guess apparently both were shot in the head. You know, you look at it right now and just everything that is going on. It does bring not only illegal immigration, but legal immigration into the forefront. And it's interesting how just a week and a half ago, Trump was out there talking about how we need more legal immigration, and boom, now they're talking about, nope, a travel ban on places that people who come to this country, their culture does not mix with our culture. You know, that they're not here to assimilate, and if they're not, now, what are the specifics of that going to be? I don't know. But the racism, you notice how that didn't stick at all for the Somali thing? When you're talking about fraud of $1 billion, nobody really cares about the waste. Remember, this was money that was targeted for kids with autism, for people that needed food, Americans that needed food, Americans that needed housing. And how far does this go up? You know, you've got that one organization of employees, Minnesota State employees, that said we knew this was going on, and they ignored it. And they're pointing the finger right at Tim Walz, saying these people knew what was going on, and they didn't stop it. If that's the case, and I'm not, again, saying Tim Walz, but if people knew about this inside his administration, they knew about it or enabled it, people will go to jail if that's the case. I don't know how you have fraud this widespread that went on for this long and no one noticed.
Tell your friends. We're here nightly. Eric Harley and Gary McNamara on Red Eye Radio.
And I'm Gary McNamara. He's Eric Harley. He's out sick today. Get better. Get back here. Because things like this remind me of Eric. Because there's a couple of audio cuts we have here, and both audio cuts, the same person. And when I heard it, I went, we're doomed. And this is former Comptroller General David Walker on with John Solomon. And he was talking about where we are right now as a country fiscally and the challenges that we have and what we might be able to do about it. Here we go.
Well, first, the government has grown too big, promised too much, subsidized too many, lost control of the budget, is flying blind in mountains of debt without an instrument panel. No wonder we got a problem, okay? Look, what we need to recognize is that DOGE did not do what needs to be done, and what they didn't go about it the right way. There's three things that have to be focused on like a laser. The GAO's high-risk list, the improper payments report that comes out on an annual basis, and the duplication, overlap, and redundancy report that comes out. Those are the things that need to be focused on like a laser. We need a government transformation initiative that will deal with that. But we also need a constitutional amendment that will limit how much debt as percentage of the economy we can take on. That's the only thing that will force Congress to make tough choices on a recurring basis. And then we need to figure out how we're going to get that done through a statutory fiscal commission. I'm working on all of those issues and more. And this next year is of critical importance. So it's full court press, pedal to the metal.
And then talk a little bit about healthcare in this country. Here we go.
It's very important. There's no question about it. And, let's look at healthcare as an example. I mean, you've got brokers that right now are trying to pitch people on their healthcare options. Obviously, they're going to make money. But the bottom line is that take health. We have to have a fundamental reassessment of how much universal health care is appropriate, affordable, and sustainable. We've way overpromised in health care. We've way over-subsidized. We spend almost 20% of our economy on health care, and yet we get below average results. Healthcare costs continue to grow faster than the economy. We can't do nip and tuck. We need radical reconstructive surgery.
So we're doomed. And I say that because you ever see on social media, somebody will say, all Congress has to do is pass a law saying that if they don't get a budget done, then they don't get paid, and we've solved the problem. See, nobody's talking about how easy it is. What do you mean? You got to get Congress to pass a law saying they don't get paid. What are you talking about? You make it sound like that's nothing. Sure, Congress will vote against their own self-interest. If we don't come to it, you want a horrible budget? Do that. If you don't pass a budget, you don't get paid in Congress. Oh, what the hell? Spend, borrow. Borrow, spend. Then we get paid. And when he talks about, that we need a constitutional amendment, can you imagine if you had a constitutional amendment that said, and I don't know what it would be set at, that the debt can only be a certain part of the GDP, whatever that would be, whatever that number would be. Well, it's not going to be what it is right now. It's going to be set lower, which means you're going to have to cut immediately. So what state legislatures are you going to get to put through a constitutional amendment to cut benefits to the people of the United States? It's okay to say this stuff, but we have created such a pathology of dependency in the United States with an expectation that the federal government delivers to you that it has fundamentally changed the Republican Party from where the Republican Party was 20 years ago. So to sit there and say with a nation, and the polling showed it, the research showed it, of what Americans think. Yes, Americans want the budget cut. We can cut the budget up to 40%, the majority of Americans say. Good. What can we cut to do that? What did the majority say we could cut? The majority said only one thing, foreign aid. And foreign aid is less than 1% of the budget. You're not going to cut it 40% because everything else that needs to be reformed and or cut, the American public believes needs more money. There is no political will. Like many in our society, until they have to file bankruptcy, they don't stop spending. And that's the reality of where we are. And so when I hear stuff like this, he's David Walker, the former Comptroller General of the United States. He's absolutely right. He said, we keep working at this. And my question would be, at what? Does the American public understand the fiscal cliff that we are approaching? Probably. They understand it. But what's more important? Their immediate needs now. And that's why, when I was in New York this past weekend, with my buddy Jeff, and he said, they got their inflation dividend. He got I think him and his wife got $400. And I said, what are you going to do with it? He goes, we're going to give it to the Elise Stefanik campaign for governor. But that's what you have. I mean, when you look at a California, now the only thing is when you look at when you look at a California, New York, and Illinois, and you see the problems that they have. And I was just reading the other day about California's, deficit. And the fact is, these states are in horrible shape, but they can't borrow like the federal government. And they're not close to reversing any of the policies that they have, and they can all see it happening. Everybody can see it happening. It's just the political will isn't there because people are concerned about what? Now. That's what they're concerned with. So I wish Mr. Walker good luck, just like we said to Doge. But when Doge came out and said, and remember, initially it was, we're going to cut $2 trillion. And we're like, what, over 10 years, 20 years, 30 years? No. Every year we said, impossible, won't happen. Even if you got Congress to do it, the American public would revolt. Absolutely revolt. If you took away, because you'd have to take away everything but Social Security, Medicare, national defense. If you cut $2 trillion. And we said they're not going to cut $2 trillion, they're not going to cut $1 trillion. If they cut $100 billion, we'd be happy, but whatever they cut, they're still spending more. The latest numbers still show that. And so that's where we are. In other news, you see that Costco has sued the federal government. If the tariffs are reversed, they want a refund, which I found really interesting because how do you do that? How will the courts look at that? Well, the federal government unfairly taxed you. How much of it did you pass on to the consumer? So would it be a windfall for companies? Because would individuals get any money back? But Costco has, I saw the article yesterday that they've filed suit in case the Supreme Court. Here it is. Costco files federal lawsuit challenging Trump's emergency tariff orders on imported goods. Costco Wholesale is suing the federal government to block his emergency tariffs in order to recover the funds the retailer says was improperly required to pay on imported goods. The case filed in the Court of International Trade argues that Trump used an emergency power law to impose tariffs on goods from China, Mexico, Canada, and dozens of other countries, even though the statute does not allow the president to create or raise tariffs. And you're saying, isn't that redundant because the Supreme Court's looking at it? The reason they did that is they wanted to be first in line to get a refund from the federal government on that money. So there you go. Costco says it has paid these duties throughout the year and now faces a deadline that could prevent it from getting the money back. The company says the government will begin finalizing or liquidating its import entries on or after December 15th. Once an entry is liquidated, the duty amount becomes locked, and importers may lose the ability to challenge or recover those charges. So they want to do. I wonder how many other companies will do that to get aboard in order to get a refund if the Supreme Court rules against the president. Nobody really has a guess because there are, 3 different classifications of tariffs, and nobody has any idea what they will do or what. I guess, will the Supreme Court even deal with giving the money back, or will they pass? Will that be handled in all the lawsuits that companies file, and then that will work all its way, up the judicial line? Because I don't know how else you would do that. So, yeah, I wouldn't hold out. I wouldn't be too optimistic about a $2,000 check next year. You might not be getting that. So, there you go. There was another story I wanted to get to. What was the other story? There was one more that I had for you here. Oh, yeah, this was it. This is my favorite story of the day. Now, I actually heard about this when I was up in New York. A round of golf with Canadian hockey legend Wayne Gretzky and President Donald Trump triggered a surge of criticism from Canadian social media users over the weekend. While with many accusing Gretzky of showing disloyalty to Canada and aligning himself with a fascist. Trump posted photos and video of the outing, which also featured golfer Brooks Koepka and Fox News host Brett Baer. The images show Gretzky on the course with the president in Florida, where Trump was wearing his Make America Great hat. The post drew rapid on it could be rapid and rabid rapid online reaction, largely from critics who argue that Gretzky should distance himself from Trump. Users described Gretzky as a traitor to Canada. So there you go. And then Trump changed his hat. Make America the great one again. We are Red Eye Radio.
Coming up, more with Gary McNamara and Eric Harley. It's Red Eye Radio.
We are Red Eye Radio. He is Eric Harley. Hopefully he's back soon. Hopefully he's back tomorrow. He's been sick. A couple of things here. First, the ISM Manufacturing Index came out yesterday. Manufacturing contracting for the 9th straight month. And as we know from what we have so far on employment, employment in manufacturing has decreased 8 months in a row. The latest month is not out yet. But in other news, the government, they got everything back up and running quick because the Transportation Security Administration, TSA, broke a record in screening the highest number of individuals ever on Sunday. This past Sunday, they revealed yesterday, the TSA screened 3.133 million individuals, the highest number in a day ever in TSA's history, bringing our top 10 busiest days all above 3 million. The second highest screening day was June 22nd of this year, with 3.09 million individuals being screened, followed by 3.08 December 1st of 2024. That would have been coming back from Thanksgiving, I think, too. And 3.04 million screened on July 20th, 2025. So there you go. 8 of the 10 busiest screening days recorded in TSA history occurred this year alone.
This is Red Eye Radio on Westwood One.